He kicked me in front of his friends, and my revenge was not what they thought. Hi there, beautiful soul. Welcome back to Stories Always, where every tale is a journey of the heart. How have you been since our last story? Grab a cup of tea and settle in, because this one is going to move you. If you've ever wondered whether love can still surprise you in a world full of judgment, then don't just listen, feel this one. And hey, if this story stirs your heart in any way, please like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that prove kindness still wins. Now, let's begin. The sound of his friend's laughter was deafening as I lay on the cold marble floor. He looked down at me, the man I loved, with nothing but contempt in his eyes before turning his back. He thought he had all the power. What he didn't know is that while he had his foot, I had the passwords, and by sunrise, he wouldn't even have a home. The first sound of the day in the penthouse was never an alarm clock. It was the whisper-quiet hum of the smart home system Amara had coded herself, gradually brightening the floor-to-ceiling windows to mimic the sunrise over the Lagos Lagoon. It was a gentle waking, a transition from the soft oblivion of sleep to the sharp, glittering reality of their life. For Jide, it was magic. For Amara, it was maintenance. She was already awake, as she always was, sitting not in their sprawling California king bed, but at the small, sterile desk in the corner of the master suite. The glow of 3 monitors cast a cool blue light on her face, illuminating the focused set of her jaw. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with a fluid, silent swiftness. They didn't clack, they danced. On the left screen, a complex web of market analytics shifted in real time. On the right, a security protocol she was designing for a new client. And in the center, the one she checked first every morning, the consolidated dashboard of Jide's financial empire, Jide Okoro Holdings. The name was his, bold and emblazoned across billboards and business journals. The architecture, the digital nervous system that made it all work, the intricate payment gateways, the automated investment algorithms, the impenetrable cybersecurity, that was all hers. He was the face, she was the foundation. The world saw the handsome, charismatic mogul who had seemingly willed a fortune into existence. They didn't see the woman in the shadows who meticulously ensured the magic never failed. A low groan came from the bed. Amara, light. Her fingers didn't stop. It's at 10%, Jide. Your circadian rhythm needs it. My circadian rhythm needs another hour of sleep, he mumbled, rolling over and pulling a silk pillow over his head. Kill it. With a few keystrokes, Amara rerouted the command. The windows darkened once more, plunging the room into a manufactured twilight. She had learned long ago that arguing was inefficient. It was faster to simply give him what he wanted, a lesson that had started with small things, like the light, and had slowly metastasized into larger, more significant parts of her life. She turned her attention back to the central screen. A red flag blinked, a large, unauthorized withdrawal attempt from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands overnight. A phishing attempt. Amateurish, but it had gotten past the first 2 firewalls. Her code, the 3rd and 4th layers, had caught it, isolated it, and was already tracing its origin. Within minutes, she had the IP address, a location in a small internet cafe in Belgrade, and had blacklisted the entire block of associated addresses. Problem solved. Jide would never even know someone had tried to steal $250,000 while he slept. She logged the incident in a private, encrypted file she kept on a separate server, a file filled with hundreds of such entries. It was her secret ledger of the dragons she slayed daily to protect his kingdom. An hour later, the smell of freshly brewed Ethiopian coffee, prepared by their housekeeper, Funke, wafted into the room. Jide stirred again, this time for good. He sat up, running a hand through his thick, perfectly coiffed hair. He was handsome, devastatingly so. It was a fact the world constantly affirmed, and a fact he wielded like a weapon. "Anything blow up overnight?" he asked, his voice still rough with sleep. It was his standard morning question, a joke that had long lost its humor for Amara. "Just a small fire in the Caymans. I put it out," she replied, her eyes still on the screen. "Good girl." He stretched, his sculpted muscles flexing under his silk pajamas. He stood and walked, not to her, but to the grand expanse of windows, pressing a button on the wall. The glass instantly cleared, revealing a breathtaking panorama of the city. The third mainland bridge was already a river of headlights. The towers of Echo Atlantic reached for the hazy morning sky. "Look at that," he said, his voice filled with a possessive awe. "Our city, my city." Amara's fingers finally stilled. She looked at his back, the broad, confident set of his shoulders as he surveyed his domain. "Our city," he'd said, but then corrected it to "my city," a Freudian slip that was no longer a slip, but a statement of fact. She had met Jide 7 years ago. He was a junior marketing executive with an untamable ambition and 1,000 brilliant, chaotic ideas. She was a quiet, ferociously intelligent postgraduate student in computer science, freelancing to pay for her mother's medical bills. He had the vision, she had the skill to build the engine. He'd been enchanted by her mind then, calling her his secret weapon. He would listen for hours as she explained the beauty of clean code, the elegance of a perfectly designed system. He'd look at her with a reverence that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. They built it all together, from a tiny shared office with a leaky ceiling to this palace in the sky. But somewhere along the way, as the money and fame grew, his reverence had curdled into something else. First it was assumption, then entitlement, and lately a casual disregard that stung more than any overt cruelty. He was no longer enchanted by her mind. He simply expected it to work for him, like the lights or the coffee machine. "Babe, you're still in your work clothes," he said, turning from the window. He gestured to her simple gray t-shirt and leggings. "Funke laid out your dress for the gala tonight, the red one. It makes your skin pop." "I had to handle the breach," she said softly. "Breach, screech. You have to be ready. The Adebayos are announcing their partnership with us tonight. Every major player in West Africa will be there. I need you looking like a queen, not a coder." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile he used for cameras and investors, all teeth, no warmth. The dismissal, small as it was, landed like a tiny sharp stone on an already bruised part of her heart. She had been the one to court the Adebayos. For 6 months, she had exchanged encrypted emails with their notoriously difficult head of tech, finding a loophole in their security that she then taught them how to fix, earning their respect in a way Jide's charm never could. The partnership was her victory. He was simply going to be the one to announce it. "I'll be ready," she said, closing the laptops. "I have a few things to finalize first." "Just don't be late, and wear the diamond earrings, the big ones. We need to look like untouchable success." "We," he said, but she knew he meant him. She was just part of the costume, another accessory to prove his worth. As she walked into their cavernous closet, a room larger than her childhood home, she saw the dress laid out on a velvet chaise. It was a stunning, backless crimson gown. Beside it, a black box from a high-end jeweler. Inside, the diamond earrings glittered. They were magnificent, but they felt cold and heavy in her hand, like beautiful, expensive shackles. Before she got ready, she went to her private bathroom. Tucked away in a drawer beneath her toiletries was a small, worn, leather-bound notebook. It was analog, untraceable. Inside, in her neat, precise script, were her what-if plans. Contingency plans for a server farm meltdown, a plan for a hostile takeover, and on the last few pages, a plan she prayed she would never have to use. The title was simple: Protocol Zero.
It detailed, step by step, how to digitally and financially dismantle Jide Okoro Holdings and transfer its core, untraceable assets into a new, anonymous entity. It was the ultimate failsafe, designed to protect the company from an external threat. But as she traced the flowchart with her finger, a cold knot formed in her stomach. She had never considered that the greatest threat to the empire she'd built might be the king himself. What does it say about a relationship when you have an exit strategy more detailed than your wedding plan? It's a question many people in difficult situations might ask themselves. Have you ever found yourself planning for the worst, even while hoping for the best? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. She closed the book and put it away, the thought lingering like a ghost. No, she was being paranoid. He was stressed. The pressure was immense. Tonight, after the gala, after the announcement, they would celebrate. Maybe she would see a flicker of the man she fell in love with, the partner who saw her as his equal, not his employee.
She had to believe that man was still in there, buried beneath the layers of silk, success, and suffocating ego. With that fragile hope, she began to get ready, preparing to play her part as the queen to his king, in a kingdom she had built but no longer felt a part of. The ballroom of the Echo Grand Hotel was a galaxy of manufactured stars. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen rain, their light refracting off a sea of diamonds, sequins, and gleaming teeth. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition, a heady cocktail that Jide drank in like oxygen. As they entered, a wave of recognition rippled through the room. Heads turned, whispers followed, and a path seemed to clear for them organically. Jide's hand was on the small of Amara's back, but it wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a proprietary hold, guiding her, positioning her. He was a showman, and she was his most valuable, most exquisite prop. The crimson dress was a success. It drew eyes, but Jide absorbed the attention, reflecting it back with a blindingly confident smile. "Jide, my man!" A portly politician with a booming laugh enveloped him in a hug, his eyes sweeping over Amara appreciatively. "You look like $1 billion. And this must be the lovely lady behind the throne." "Amara, meet Senator Balogan," Jide said, the smile plastered on his face. "And she's not behind the throne, Senator. She's beside it, the most beautiful part of the kingdom." The words were perfect, practiced, but Amara felt the hollowness in them. She smiled, a small, polite tilting of her lips, and shook the senator's hand. His grip was clammy, his gaze lingering a moment too long. She felt a familiar urge to retreat, to become invisible, but Jide's hand tightened on her back, holding her in place. For the first hour, he paraded her around the room, a whirlwind of introductions and air kisses. He was magnificent in his element, his voice a smooth, confident baritone as he networked, flattered, and charmed. Amara played her part, a silent, smiling effigy of support. She listened to men discuss deals she had structured, praise software she had written, and marvel at a success she had painstakingly engineered. And with every compliment directed at Jide, she felt herself shrink, a little more of her erased. Eventually, he deposited her near a towering floral arrangement with a flute of champagne. "Stay here, look pretty. I need to go and close the deal." He winked, then strode off toward the Adebayo family patriarch, his stride infused with the unassailable confidence of a man who had never known true failure. Alone, Amara felt the suffocating weight of the room press in on her. The chatter became a dull roar, the laughter sharp and mocking. She watched Jide across the room. He was quickly absorbed into his inner circle, a coterie of sycophantic young men who mirrored his expensive taste and arrogant posture. And then she saw her, Kemi, a model-turned-influencer whose entire career seemed to be built on being seen with powerful men. She was draped in silver, shimmering like a mirage, and she slid up to Jide's side as if she belonged there.
She whispered something in his ear, and he threw his head back and laughed, a loud, unguarded sound he rarely used with Amara anymore. He didn't push Kemi away. He let her hand rest on his arm. Right there, in the open. A cold, familiar ache spread through Amara's chest. It was the pain of 1,000 tiny betrayals, 1,000 moments of being made to feel secondary. She took a steadying sip of her champagne, the bubbles fizzing uselessly against the knot of dread in her stomach. She shouldn't care. It was just Jide being Jide. It was part of the price of admission to this life. But tonight it felt different. The disrespect was more blatant, amplified by the public stage. Her eyes drifted past Jide's laughing circle, and she saw him, Femi Adeyemi, a rival tech CEO Jide had ruthlessly squeezed out of a government contract 6 months prior. Femi was watching Jide with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. He was talking to a journalist known for his poison pen articles. This was dangerous. Jide, high on his own success and surrounded by his yes-men, wouldn't see the threat. As if summoned, Femi detached himself from the journalist and began to walk toward Jide's group. Amara felt a jolt of anxiety. This was not the night for a confrontation. The Adebayo deal was still fragile. She watched as Femi cut through the circle with a sharp, predatory smile. "Jide, enjoying the view from the top? Must be nice, now that you have a monopoly." Jide's smile tightened. "Femi, I didn't see you slithering around down there. They must have lowered their standards for entry tonight." His friend snickered. Kemi giggled, clinging to Jide's arm.
Femi's smile didn't falter. "Some of us build our companies with integrity. We don't need to stand on the backs of our betters to feel tall." He glanced pointedly at Amara, standing alone across the way, a silent indictment that only she seemed to understand. He was implying Jide's success wasn't his own. The barb hit its mark. Amara saw it in the sudden tension in Jide's shoulders, the dangerous glint in his eyes. His biggest insecurity, the one that festered beneath all the bravado, was the fear of being seen of a fraud. Femi had just poked it with a stick. Jide needed to reassert his dominance, and fast. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "Integrity? Is that what you call bankruptcy?" The circle erupted in jeering laughter. Femi's face flushed with anger, but he had lost the round. He gave a curt, dismissive nod and walked away. But the damage was done. Jide was rattled, his ego bruised. He was a predator who had been wounded, and now he was looking for a safer target to attack. His eyes scanned the room, sweeping past the powerful men and glittering women, and then they landed on her, on Amara. And at that exact moment, in a horribly timed gesture of care, Amara noticed a faint smudge of Kemi's garish pink lipstick on his crisp white collar. It was small, almost invisible, but in this room of curated perfection, it was an imperfection, a sign of his sloppiness. She caught his eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of her head, her gaze flicking down to her own collar. It was their old signal, from a time when they were a team. Check yourself. Small detail. Fix it. He saw the gesture, but he didn't see the love or the protection behind it. He saw it through the distorted lens of his own humiliation. He saw it as a criticism, a public correction, in front of his friends, in front of Kemi, right after Femi had questioned his legitimacy. His face, which had been smiling a moment before, hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Amara," he called out, his voice cutting through the nearby chatter. A path cleared again. All eyes were on her as she walked toward him, the crimson silk of her dress whispering against the marble floor. She felt 100 gazes on her, and a deep, primal instinct screamed at her to turn and run. But she didn't. She walked toward her partner. "Yes, Jide?" she asked softly as she reached the circle. He didn't lower his voice. He wanted an audience. "What was that? That little signal you just gave me?" Kemi and his friend smirked, sensing a spectacle. "It was nothing," Amara murmured, her eyes pleading with him. "Just your collar." "My collar?"
He feigned confusion, then looked at it, pretending to see the smudge for the first time. He didn't wipe it away. He looked back at her, his eyes cold and flat. "You think I need you to point out a speck of dust in the middle of the most important night of my career? You think I need you to manage me like a child?" "No, Jite, of course not. I was only trying to—" "Help?" He spat the word out, his voice dripping with venom. "You want to help? Help by staying quiet. Help by looking good and not having opinions. That's your job. Do you understand it, or is even that too complex for your little brain?" The world began to tilt. The air grew thin. The faces around her blurred into grotesque smiling masks. His words were stones, each one hitting her with a physical force. She could feel the blood draining from her face. "Jide, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not here." Her plea was a mistake. It was a show of weakness, and it fueled his rage. It was the final confirmation he needed that she was the perfect target for the poison Femi had injected into him. "Not here?" He took a step closer, his towering frame blocking out the light. He smelled of champagne and something ugly, something rotten. "You embarrass me in front of my friends, in front of everyone, and you have the nerve to tell me not here?" She took a step back, her heel catching on the hem of her own dress. She stumbled. And then it happened. Time didn't just slow down, it fractured. She saw his leg swing back. She saw the polished shine of his Italian leather shoe. She saw the disgust twisting his handsome features into something monstrous. She saw the synchronized, eager leaning in of his friends. The impact wasn't as hard as she would have imagined. It was a solid, contemptuous shove from his foot to her hip, designed not to injure, but to demean. It was a kick that said, "You are nothing. You are beneath me. You are something to be moved out of the way." She fell. The fall was silent in her mind, but the sound in the room was deafening. A collective sharp intake of breath from the wider crowd. The hard, definitive crack of her elbow hitting the marble floor. The soft, tragic rustle of crimson silk pooling around her.
For a single eternal second, there was absolute silence. The universe held its breath. Then the silence was shattered by a single, brutal sound, the laughter of Jeed's friends. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a loud, braying roar of approval. Kemi covered her mouth, her eyes wide with malicious delight. Amara lay on the cold, unforgiving floor, the pain in her hip and elbow a distant echo to the catastrophic shattering of her soul. She looked up. She didn't see the crowd. She didn't see the chandeliers. She only saw Jeed. He was looking down at her, not with regret, not with shock, but with a look of chilling, triumphant satisfaction. He had exorcised his demon of inadequacy by creating a real one in her. He straightened his tie. He turned his back on her, a final, absolute act of dismissal. "Come on," he said to his circle, his voice once again smooth and controlled. "Let's get a real drink." And they walked away, their laughter trailing behind them, leaving her there. A splash of crimson on a field of white marble. A broken queen in a fallen kingdom. The party, after a moment of stunned hesitation, slowly began to resume its rhythm, the river of conversation flowing around the rock of her humiliation, as if she were already gone. But she wasn't gone. She was just beginning. For a long time, Amara didn't move. The cold of the marble floor seeped through the thin silk of her dress, through her skin, and into her bones, where it settled deep in her marrow. It was a profound, numbing cold that extinguished the sharp fire of her initial shock. The sounds of the gala returned in waves, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of faint concern, the thrum of the live band striking up a new song.
Each sound was a world away, a broadcast from a planet she no longer inhabited. A hotel security guard, his face a mask of professional neutrality, was the first to approach. "Ma'am, are you all right? Should I call a medic?" His voice was gentle, but it felt like an intrusion, a violation of the strange protective cocoon of silence she had built around herself. She slowly, stiffly pushed herself up, ignoring the shooting pain in her elbow and the deep throbbing ache in her hip. Her eyes were dry. The tears she might have expected to cry felt frozen somewhere deep inside her chest. "No," she said, her voice a raw, unfamiliar croak. "I'm fine." She didn't look for Jeed. She knew he wouldn't be there. He had moved on, his violent act of theater concluded, the curtain drawn. He would be at the bar, accepting backpats, his masculinity reaffirmed by his cruelty. The thought didn't even spark anger anymore. It was just a data point, a final, irrefutable piece of evidence. With a dignity that felt alien to her, she gathered the crimson fabric of her dress and walked. She didn't run, she didn't stumble. She moved with a measured, deliberate pace, a ghost gliding through a party of the living. She could feel the stares on her back, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and quiet condemnation. They weren't just staring at a woman who had fallen, they were staring at a woman who had been discarded. She didn't take the elevator from the lobby. She took a service elevator, her mind automatically seeking the path of least resistance, of least observation. The ride down was silent. In the polished steel of the elevator walls, she saw her reflection. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her eyes were vacant, and a single ugly scrape was visible on her elbow. The crimson dress, once a symbol of power and beauty, now looked like a costume from a tragedy. The diamond earrings felt like lead weights pulling her down. She walked out into the humid Lagos night. The valet, a young man who had greeted her with a deferential "Good evening, Mrs. Okoro," just a few hours ago, now looked at her with wide, uncertain eyes. He had probably already heard. News in a place like this traveled faster than light. "Car, ma'am?" he asked hesitantly. "No," she said, "a taxi." The word felt foreign on her tongue. She hadn't taken a taxi in years. The valet nodded and blew his whistle, and a yellow cab with a rattling engine pulled up to the curb. As she slid into the back seat, the vinyl sticky against her skin, she reached up and unclipped the diamond earrings. They were cold and hard in her palm. She held them for a moment, then, without a second thought, she pressed them into the valet's hand. "For your trouble," she said, her voice flat. The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. He stammered a thank you as she closed the door, shutting out the world of the Echo Grand Hotel for good. She gave the driver the address to the penthouse, a reflex, then immediately corrected herself. "No, change of plans. Take me to Ikoyi, the tech district."
The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed at the sight of this woman in a blood-red ball gown asking to go to a district of dark, empty office buildings at this time of night. But he just nodded and pulled into the chaotic flow of traffic. The journey was a blur of neon signs and blurred headlights. Amara stared out the window, but she didn't see the city. She saw lines of code. She saw firewalls and back doors. She saw the intricate digital web she had woven around Jide's life, a web she had designed to protect him, a web that had become his cage, and he didn't even know it. The anger hadn't come yet, neither had the grief. What was percolating in their place was a terrifying, crystalline clarity. It was the same hyper-focused state she entered when she was deep in a complex coding problem, where emotion was a distraction and the only thing that mattered was logic, sequence, and execution. The problem wasn't a phishing attempt anymore. The problem was Jide, and the solution was Protocol Zero. She had the taxi drop her off a block away from a sleek, anonymous-looking office tower. It was one of a dozen server hosting facilities she used, this one holding the primary off-site backups for Jide Okoro Holdings. Her fingerprints and a retinal scan gave her access to the building. The night security guard knew her, but he also knew not to ask questions. She was the architect. She belonged here. The server room was cold and loud, a symphony of whirring fans keeping the monoliths of data from overheating. The air smelled of ozone and chilled recycled air. It was a sterile, inhuman place. And in that moment, she felt more at home here than she ever had in the opulent penthouse. Here, things made sense. There were rules. There were commands and executions. There was no messy, unpredictable human emotion. She sat down at the master console, the glow of the command line interface illuminating her face. Her fingers, which had felt so clumsy and useless on the ballroom floor, found their purpose on the keyboard. They flew. While Jide was ordering another bottle of vintage champagne, celebrating his dominance, Amara was methodically, precisely, beginning to erase him. She started small. The first command she typed was a simple one. It triggered a script she had written years ago, a failsafe to be used only in a catastrophic security event. The script began migrating all liquid assets, the cash reserves, the short-term investments, the operating capital, from their primary, jointly named corporate accounts to a series of encrypted, tertiary holding accounts in Switzerland and Singapore. These accounts were not in Jide's name. They were not even in Amara's name. They were in the name of a shell corporation she had created for just this contingency, an entity so deeply buried in layers of digital red tape that it was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. The migration would take 3 hours to complete, routing the funds through a dozen international banks to make the trail impossible to follow in real time. Next, she accessed the core administrative panels for their entire digital life, the smart home system, their mobile phone accounts, their credit cards. With a few lines of code, she began systematically rewriting the permissions. Jide Okoro, administrator access, revoked. Jide Okoro, user access, pending deletion. She was demoting him from king to commoner in his own digital kingdom. She changed the master password for the penthouse's smart home system to a 64-character alphanumeric string generated from the last stanza of a Sylvia Plath poem. He would never guess it. She went into the back end of their mobile provider. She cloned his number, forwarding all incoming calls and texts to a burnable, encrypted number she now controlled. Then she scheduled his primary line and the lines of his sycophantic friends who were on the company plan for deactivation at 7 a.m. She navigated to the banking portals for his personal credit cards, the Centurion card he was so proud of, the one he called his black card. She was the primary account holder on all of them, a fact he'd long forgotten. He was just an authorized user. She lowered his credit limit on each card to 1 Nigerian naira. The next time he tried to buy a coffee, it would be declined. Every keystroke was a small, precise act of rebellion. This wasn't a loud, screaming fight. It was a silent, digital coup. She was a ghost in the machine, haunting the infrastructure of his life, turning all the tools of his comfort and power against him. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Jide was at the peak of his night. He had successfully schmoozed the Adebayos, who, oblivious to the drama, had toasted to their new partnership.
He was surrounded by admirers, Kemi draped on his arm, the story of his confrontation with Femi already being retold and embellished by his friends. The story of what he did to Amara was carefully omitted from this heroic retelling. In their world, she didn't merit a mention. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his mother. "Jide, what is this I am hearing? Call me immediately." He rolled his eyes and silenced the phone. He'd deal with that later. Another text came through, from a business acquaintance. "That was a bad scene tonight. Hope you two are okay." He scoffed. "People are so dramatic," he said to Kemi, showing her the text. She giggled and refilled his glass. He felt a flicker of annoyance. Why were people focused on that? It was nothing, a minor domestic spat. Amara was probably already back at the penthouse, crying. She'd be sorry in the morning. She always was. He downed his champagne, the cold liquid doing little to quell the unease now stirring in his gut. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to go home, to see her, to make sure she was where she was supposed to be, to re-establish his control. "I'm heading out," he announced to his circle. "Party's over." He left without a backward glance, striding out of the hotel with the same unshakable arrogance he'd entered with. He got into his Mercedes G-Wagon, the engine roaring to life with a satisfying growl. As he drove through the sleeping city, he pictured the scene. He would walk into the penthouse, find Amara weeping in their bed, and he would be magnanimous. He would forgive her for embarrassing him. He would allow her to apologize. And then everything would be back to normal. But back in the cold server room, Amara was executing the final command of the first phase. She was looking at the source code for Jide Okoro Holdings' flagship financial management software, the very foundation of his company. It was her masterpiece, millions of lines of elegant, brilliant code. Her code. With a deep, steadying breath, she created a new master administrator account, one with a single, unchangeable password. The account name was simple, A, her initials. Then she initiated Protocol Zero's master lockout command. At 7 a.m., every single user account, including the one Jide used to view his company's performance, would be frozen. All data would be inaccessible. All operations would cease. The entire company, his entire empire, would be bricked. She leaned back in the chair, the final command executing in the silent, humming room. The cold in her bones had been replaced by something else, a resolute, unyielding calm. The ghost in the machine had finished her haunting. Now she would simply wait for the sun to rise, and for the king to arrive at his castle, and find that the locks had been changed. The sun rose over Lagos with a hazy, indifferent light, painting the sky in shades of pale orange and gray. Jide woke up in his car. He had pulled over a few blocks from their building, the champagne and the adrenaline of the night finally catching up to him, and had drifted into a heavy, dreamless sleep. His neck was stiff, and his head throbbed with the dull, familiar ache of a hangover. He stretched, the leather of the G-Wagon seats creaking in protest. He glanced at the time on the dashboard, 6:55 a.m. He felt a pang of irritation. He had intended to stride in last night, a conquering hero. Instead, he'd fallen asleep in his own driveway like a common drunk. He needed coffee, a shower, and to see the apologetic look on Amara's face. That would set the world right again. He drove the final 2 blocks and pulled up to the private entrance of their building. He swiped his access card at the garage gate. Access denied. A red light blinked angrily. He frowned and swiped it again, harder this time. Access denied. Useless, he muttered, grabbing his phone to call the front desk. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over Penthouse Concierge. He pressed the call button. Nothing happened. No dial tone, no ringing, just silence. He looked at the top of the screen. No service. A wave of frustration washed over him. He honked the horn, a long, impatient blast that echoed in the quiet morning. After a moment, a security guard he didn't recognize emerged from the side door, looking annoyed. "Can I help you, sir?" the guard asked, his tone less than respectful. "Yes, you can help me by opening this gate," Jide snapped. "My keycard isn't working. I live here, the penthouse." The guard looked him up and down, his rumpled tuxedo, his bleary eyes. He looked less like a resident and more like the aftermath of a party. "Name?" "Jide Okoro," he said, his voice laced with indignation.
Honestly, do you know who I am?" The guard typed something into a tablet. He shook his head. "Sorry, sir. No Jide Okoro on the resident list."
Jide stared at him dumbfounded. "What? That's impossible. I've lived here for 4 years. Check again." "I've checked, sir. The system was updated this morning. There is an AN registered for the penthouse. No Okoro. You'll have to leave." Before Jide could unleash the torrent of fury building in his chest, his phone buzzed. A notification from his bank. "Your transaction of 2,500 naira at the Daily Grind has been declined. Reason? Insufficient funds." He blanked. He hadn't even bought anything. He realized Amara must have an automatic coffee subscription, but insufficient funds? That was laughable. He opened his banking app, the one with the sleek, custom interface Amara had designed for him. He tried to log in. "Invalid credentials. Please try again." He tried again, slower this time. "Invalid credentials. Your account has been locked due to multiple failed attempts." A cold dread, far more chilling than the morning air, began to seep into his veins. This wasn't a glitch. This was coordinated. This was her. He abandoned the car, leaving it idling in front of the gate, and stormed towards the main entrance of the building. The glass doors, which should have slid open automatically at his approach, remained stubbornly shut. He banged on them with his fist. The concierge inside looked at him, then at his screen, then gave a slight, dismissive shake of his head and turned away. He was locked out. He was literally, physically locked out of his own home. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in his throat. He pulled out his wallet, fumbling for his black card. He would go to a hotel, the Echo Grand. He would get their best suite and sort this out. He walked to the main road, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel, and hailed a taxi. The irony of it was lost on him. "Echo Grand," he barked, sliding into the back. The ride was a torment of confusion and rising fury. What was she playing at? Was this her idea of a punishment? A childish little tantrum? To lock him out? Cut off his cards? He'd have it all sorted in an hour. He'd call the bank's president, Demola, on his private line. He'd have her name removed from everything. He'd crush this pathetic little rebellion. They arrived at the hotel. He strode through the lobby, ignoring the curious looks from the staff who had seen him in his prime just hours earlier. "The presidential suite," he said to the clerk at the front desk, slapping his Centurion card on the counter. "And a pot of your strongest coffee, sent up immediately." The clerk, a polite young woman, took the card. She swiped it. A small troubled frown appeared on her face. She swiped it again. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's been declined." "That's not possible," Jide said through gritted teeth. "Run it again." "I have, sir. The limit on the card appears to be 1 naira." She looked at him with an expression of deep pity, and that was the look that finally broke him. Pity. He was being pitied by a hotel clerk. He snatched the card back, his face burning with a shame so intense it felt like a physical blow. He stumbled out of the hotel, back into the smoggy morning. He was standing on the curb, a king in last night's clothes, with no castle and no currency. He was homeless. His mind raced, desperately searching for a foothold in his collapsing world. His company, of course. The money in his personal accounts was nothing compared to the corporate reserves. He just needed to get to the office, get online, and undo whatever damage she had done. He took another taxi, paying for it with the last few rumpled bills in his wallet, and went to the gleaming skyscraper that housed Jide Okoro Holdings. As he walked into the lobby, he saw the first signs of the real catastrophe. The normally bustling office was in a state of quiet chaos. Employees were gathered in small, anxious clusters. Phones were being answered and slammed down. His COO, Bayo, a man known for his unflappable calm, was sweating profusely, his tie loosened. "Bayo, what the hell is going on?" Jide demanded.
Bayo turned, his face a picture of pure panic. Jide, thank God, we're locked out. Everything. The trading platforms, the client databases, the payment systems, everything is frozen. We're getting calls from everyone. The Adebayos are threatening to sue. We can't access a single file. The entire system is bricked. Jide pushed past him, heading for his corner office. She did this. Amara did this. I'll fix it. He sat down at his custom-built computer, the centerpiece of his office, and tried to log in to the main administrative dashboard. Access denied. User account J. Okoro does not exist.
He stared at the screen, the words blurring in front of his eyes. It was one thing to be locked out of his home, his bank accounts. That was personal. This was his identity, his empire. And she had taken it. She hadn't just changed the locks, she had ripped the entire building from its foundations. "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "I am Jide Okoro." Bayo shook his head, his face pale. "Our tech team has been trying for 2 hours. They said the entire user hierarchy has been deleted and replaced with a single encrypted super administrator account. They can't bypass it. They say it's the most elegant and vicious piece of lockdown coding they've ever seen. Whoever did this, they built the system from the ground up, and they built in a kill switch that only they can control." The truth landed on Jide with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. They built the system from the ground up. She hadn't just helped him, she hadn't just been his secret weapon, she had built it, all of it. And in his arrogance, in his consuming need to be the sole architect of his own success, he had forgotten that the person who builds the house is the only one who knows where all the load-bearing walls are, and how to bring it all crashing down. His phone, which had been useless all morning, suddenly buzzed. It wasn't a call or a text, it was a single, solitary email that had somehow slipped through the digital blockade. It was from an anonymous, encrypted address. The subject line was blank. He opened it. The email contained a single image. It was a live security feed from a location he didn't recognize. A quiet, minimalist apartment. And in the center of the frame was Amara. She was not in her ball gown. She was wearing simple black trousers and a white blouse. She was sitting at a new desk in front of a new set of monitors, and she was drinking a cup of coffee. The logo on the mug was from The Daily Grind. The $2,500 transaction that had been declined on hers card had been approved on hers. She looked calm. She looked peaceful. She looked, for the first time in years, completely and utterly free. And as he stared at the image of the woman he had kicked to the ground, now sitting serene amidst the ruins of his entire world, Jide Okoro finally, truly understood. His revenge wasn't a tantrum, it was a demolition. And it was just getting started. The story takes a dramatic turn as Jide confronts the reality of his situation. We often see stories of revenge, but how does the experience of hitting rock bottom change a person? Can someone who has inflicted so much pain ever truly understand the consequences of their actions? Share your thoughts on whether this is a point of no return for Jide, or the beginning of a painful transformation. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in helplessness. Jide, the man whose name opened doors and commanded respect, was now a ghost in his own city. The G-Wagon was eventually towed. His friends, the same ones who had laughed at his cruel joke, were suddenly unreachable. Their phones, also on the company plan, had gone dark, just as Amara had scheduled. Stranded and furious, they were no help at all. His calls to his mother were fraught with her weeping and his own frustrated yelling. She offered him a place to stay, but the thought of returning to his childhood home in Surulere, a failure seeking refuge, was a humiliation he couldn't yet bear. He spent the first night on the couch of Bayo, his COO.
The sleek, modern apartment felt like a cheap imitation of his own lost penthouse. Bayo, fraught with the stress of a collapsing company, treated him less like a boss and more like a dangerous, unpredictable houseguest. They spent hours with the frantic tech team on speakerphone, every conversation ending in the same bleak conclusion. They were locked out, completely. The digital fortress Amara had built was impenetrable. They couldn't go around it, they couldn't break it down. The only way in was with a key only she possessed. "We have to find her," Jide said, pacing Bayo's living room like a caged animal. His tuxedo was starting to smell, and he had been forced to borrow a t-shirt and jeans that were too tight in the shoulders. The indignity was a constant, itchy reminder of his fall. "And say what, Jide?" Bayo asked, his voice weary. "What could you possibly say to her now?" "I'll get her to listen. I'll apologize. Whatever it takes." The word apologize tasted like ash in his mouth. It was a strategy, not a sentiment, a means to an end. But how to find her? She had vanished. The penthouse was registered to an anonymous entity. The security feed she had sent him was untraceable. She had planned this with the same meticulous detail she used to plan a stock market acquisition.
It was on the second day, fueled by stale coffee and sheer desperation, that Jide had a spark of an idea. It wasn't about technology or finance, it was about her. Who was she outside of him? What did she care about? Her mother. Her mother, Grace, lived in a quiet, modest house in a middle-class neighborhood, the house Amara had bought for her 5 years ago. Jide had only been there twice, finding it small and unimpressive. But Amara went every Sunday. It was her sanctuary. He borrowed a few thousand naira from a visibly reluctant Bayo and took a taxi. As the cab moved from the glittering artifice of Victoria Island to the more grounded, everyday reality of the mainland, Jide felt a growing sense of dislocation. This was the world Amara came from, a world he had tried so hard to erase for both of them. He found the house, a simple but well-kept bungalow with a small, neat garden of hibiscus flowers. He stood across the street for a moment, watching. There were no signs of Amara's car, no indication she was there. He was about to turn away, defeated, when he saw it. Parked a few houses down was a nondescript Toyota sedan, and sitting in the driver's seat was a man in a sharp suit trying very hard to look like he wasn't watching the house. Security. Amara's security. She wasn't here, but she was protecting this place. A new plan, born of pure predatory instinct, formed in his mind. He couldn't storm the castle, so he would lay siege to the village. He walked up to the house, his heart pounding a nervous, angry rhythm. He knocked on the door. A moment later, it opened. Grace stood there, a woman with Amara's kind eyes, but with lines of worry etched deep around them. She looked at Jide, and her face, which had been preparing a welcoming smile, froze into a mask of cold fury. "You," she said, her voice low and trembling with a rage that surprised him. "You have some nerve coming here." "Grace, please," Jide began, trying to summon the charm that had never failed him. "I just need to talk to her. I need to find Amara." "You will do no such thing," she said, her body blocking the doorway. "After what you did, after you humiliated my child in front of the entire world, you are lucky I am a good Christian woman, or I would strike you where you stand." The security guard from the car was now walking purposefully toward them. Jide knew he had only seconds. "This isn't about that, Grace. This is about the company. She's destroying everything we built," he pleaded, his voice rising in desperation. Grace let out a short, bitter laugh. "Everything you built? You foolish, arrogant boy. You didn't build anything. You were just the loud noise in the front of the shop. My daughter, my Amara, she laid every brick. She drew every blueprint. She built you an empire, and you treated her like a servant. This isn't destruction. This is repossession." Her words hit him harder than the kick he had given Amara.
Repossession. The word implied ownership. It implied that it was hers to take back all along. The guard was now at the gate. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" "Yes," Grace said, her eyes never leaving Jide's. "Remove this trash from my property." As the guard firmly escorted a protesting Jide back to the street, his mind was reeling. He hadn't just lost his company. He was confronting a truth he had willfully ignored for years. It had never been his company to begin with. He remembered in a flash the early days. Sitting in their tiny, cramped office, him talking a mile a minute about branding and market disruption, while she sat in silence, her brow furrowed in concentration, her fingers flying across a second-hand keyboard, actually creating the product he was selling. He remembered her explaining complex algorithms to him, and him nodding along, understanding maybe half of it, but loving the way investors' eyes widened when he repeated the buzzwords she had taught him. He remembered her staying up for 72 hours straight to patch a security flaw that would have ruined them, while he was out at a club celebrating a new contract. He had taken the credit for her work, her genius, her sacrifice. He had taken it all and called it his own. Defeated, he retreated to the only place left that would take him, his mother's house. The moment he walked through the door, the smell of his childhood, of egusi soup and old wood, enveloped him. His mother, a formidable woman wrapped in traditional fabrics, looked at him with a mixture of love and profound disappointment. "So," she said, her voice sharp, "the prodigal son returns, with no fatted calf to slaughter." That night, stripped of his suits, his cars, and his pride, Jide sat in his childhood bedroom, a room that felt impossibly small. He was surrounded by the ghosts of a simpler boy, one who had dreamed of success but had not yet been poisoned by it.
A call finally came through on Bayo's borrowed phone. It was an unknown number. He answered it, his heart leaping with a desperate hope that it was her. It was. "Jide," Amara's voice said. It was not the soft, gentle voice he was used to. It was cold, clear, and steady, like the surface of a frozen lake. "Amara, thank God! What are you doing? You have to stop this. You're going to destroy us." "There is no us anymore, Jide," she replied, her voice devoid of any emotion. "And I am not destroying anything. I am salvaging my assets." "Your assets? Amara, my name is on the building," he yelled, his frustration boiling over. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then she said a sentence that would echo in his mind for years to come. "Your name is on the cover of the book, Jide. My name is in the copyright notice on the first page. The law and the code cares about the copyright, not the cover. You should know that. I tried to teach you." He was speechless. It was true. In the initial incorporation documents, the ones he had barely read, she had insisted on listing herself as the sole creator and owner of the proprietary software that was the company's core asset. He had dismissed it as technical jargon at the time. It was the foundation of everything, and it was legally, unequivocally hers. "What do you want, Amara?" he finally whispered, his voice broken. "Money? You want it all? Take it. Just give me back my life." "I already have the money," she said calmly. "What I want is a meeting, my office, tomorrow, 10 a.m. I'm sending you the address. Come alone." She sent the text. It was an address he didn't recognize, in a part of the city known for its quiet, discreet professional services firms. As he looked at the address, a piece of him felt a flicker of hope. A meeting, a negotiation. He could fix this. He was a master negotiator. He could talk his way out of anything. But as he lay in the dark, in a bed that was too small for him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not walking into a negotiation. He was walking into a sentencing. And the woman he had pushed to the ground was now his judge, his jury, and the sole architect of his fate.
The address Amara sent led Jide to a glass-fronted building that was the physical embodiment of quiet, expensive competence. The lobby was minimalist, all polished concrete and dark wood, with a receptionist who spoke in hushed, respectful tones. There was no grand sign for Jide Okoro Holdings here. Instead, the directory listed a single, discreet firm, AN Solutions, her initials. It had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. He was escorted not to a lavish corner office, but to a simple, functional conference room. The room was dominated by a large mahogany table, and at its head sat Amara. She was dressed in a sharp navy blue pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She looked powerful, not in the loud, ostentatious way he had defined the word, but in a way that was deep, solid, and immovable. She was not alone. Sitting to her right was a man Jide had never seen before. He was perhaps in his late 30s, with a calm, intelligent face and an air of unshakable composure. He wore a simple, well-tailored suit that suggested substance over style. He didn't look at Jide with pity or contempt, but with a neutral, assessing gaze that was somehow more unnerving. "Jide," Amara said, her voice even. "This is David Alabi, my counsel." David nodded politely. "Mr. Okoro." Jide's heart sank. This wasn't a personal meeting. This wasn't a lover's quarrel. This was a legal proceeding. He was already out of his depth. "Lawyers? Really, Amara?" he said, trying for a tone of weary disappointment. "Is that what we are now?" "It's what I am now, Jide," she corrected him gently. "A woman who requires legal counsel to protect her interests. Please sit." He sat opposite them, the polished surface of the table reflecting his own strained, haggard face. He felt like a defendant in the dock. Amara slid a thick document across the table. "This is a severance agreement. It outlines the complete dissolution of our professional and personal partnership." Jide stared at the cover page. It was all there, in cold black and white legalese. He was to relinquish all claims to the company, the penthouse, the cars, and all associated assets. In return, AN Solutions would not pursue criminal charges for a list of financial indiscretions they had uncovered, tax evasion schemes he had pushed for against her advice, inflated expense reports, and undocumented loans to his friends. "This is everything," he whispered, flipping through the pages. "You're leaving me with nothing." "I'm leaving you with your freedom, Jide," David said, his voice calm and reasonable. "The evidence of financial misconduct we have is substantial. We could have gone to the EFCC.
Instead, Miss Nwabwezi is offering you a clean break. She is being, in my professional opinion, extraordinarily generous." Generous? Jide wanted to laugh. He wanted to scream. She had taken his entire world and was calling it generosity. But as he looked at the quiet confidence on David's face and the unyielding resolve in Amara's, he knew they held all the cards. What followed was not a negotiation, it was an education. For 2 hours, David and Amara walked him through the reality of his situation. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't use emotional language. They used facts, figures, and legal statutes. David would cite a clause in the severance agreement, and Amara, with her encyclopedic knowledge of their shared history, would provide the context. "The clause regarding the Dubai property," David would say, pointing to a line on the page. "That was purchased with funds diverted from the R&D budget," Amara would add, her eyes fixed on the document. "Jide, you told me it was a necessary business entertainment expense. But the account it was funneled through was the one I flagged for tax irregularities in 2022. With every new revelation, Jide felt smaller. He was seeing the last 7 years of his life not through the lens of his own ego, but through the clear, objective lens of data and law.
He saw a pattern of recklessness, of ego, of taking and taking and taking, while she quietly cleaned up his messes and secured the foundations he was constantly threatening to crack. But it was the way she and David worked together that struck him the most. There was a quiet, seamless synergy between them. David would lay out the legal framework, and Amara would fill it with irrefutable data. He was the shield, and she was the sword. They spoke with a mutual respect, a shorthand that suggested hours of conversation, of strategy, of a shared goal. He saw David subtly slide a glass of water closer to her when her voice grew hoarse. He saw Amara glance at David for confirmation before answering one of Jide's more aggressive questions. And David would give a barely perceptible nod. It was a partnership. It was what he and Amara were supposed to have been. It was what he had destroyed. In that sterile conference room, watching the woman he had abused being defended and supported by a man who clearly respected her mind, a foreign and painful emotion began to surface in Jeed's chest, pushing past the anger and the shame. It was a flicker of genuine remorse. He wasn't just remorseful that he had been caught. He was, for the first time, starting to feel a sliver of the pain he had caused. He remembered the look on her face on the floor of the ballroom, the utter devastation, the complete erasure of her spirit. And he had been the one to put it there. Why? He asked, the question coming out as a hoarse whisper. He wasn't talking about the severance agreement anymore. He was talking about everything. Why did you stay for so long, Amara? If I was this monster. Amara looked up from the papers, and for the first time, her gaze met his. The coldness in her eyes softened, just for a moment, and was replaced by a deep, ancient sadness. Because I remembered the man you were in that first, tiny office, she said, her voice quiet. The man with the brilliant, crazy ideas who thought my mind was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. I kept thinking he was still in there, somewhere. I thought if I just worked harder, if I just made the company more successful, if I just kept everything perfect, he would come back. She took a steadying breath. The kick, it didn't just hurt me, Jeed. It showed me. The man I fell in love with wasn't buried under your success. He was gone. You killed him, piece by piece, with every lie, every dismissal, every time you took credit for my work. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of unspoken years. Jide had no response. There was no defense. She had just handed him the unvarnished, brutal truth of his own character. Finally, he picked up the pen. His hand was trembling. He looked at the signature line. This was it. The official surrender. The end of Jeed Okoro, the mogul. As he was about to sign, David spoke again, his tone still calm. There is one more thing, Mr. Okoro, not in the agreement. It's a personal request from my client. Jide looked up. Amara, Miss Nwabwezi, is setting up a foundation, David explained. A non-profit dedicated to providing tech scholarships and startup capital for young women in Nigeria. Women like her, who have the talent but not the opportunity. Jide stared at Amara, confused. I'm seeding it with 10% of the company's liquid assets, Amara said. It's already in motion. The foundation will be my life's work now, building something that lasts, something that helps. She took a steadying breath. The kick, it didn't just hurt me, Jeed. It showed me. The man I fell in love with wasn't buried under your success. He was gone. You killed him, piece by piece, with every lie, every dismissal, every time you took credit for my work. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of unspoken years. Jide had no response. There was no defense. She had just handed him the unvarnished, brutal truth of his own character. Finally, he picked up the pen. His hand was trembling. He looked at the signature line. This was it. The official surrender. The end of Jeed Okoro, the mogul. As he was about to sign, David spoke again, his tone still calm. "There is one more thing, Mr. Okoro. Not in the agreement. It's a personal request from my client." Jide looked up. "Amara, Miss Nwabwezi, is setting up a foundation," David explained. "A nonprofit dedicated to providing tech scholarships and startup capital for young women in Nigeria. Women like her, who have the talent but not the opportunity."
The contrast was staggering. He had spent his life building an empire to serve his own ego. And her first act, upon seizing control of that empire, was to give a piece of it away, to build something for others. He thought of her mother's words. "My daughter, she laid every brick. She was a builder. It was her nature." And he had tried to make her a decoration. With a final, shuddering breath, Jide signed the document. He pushed it back across the table. It was done. He stood up to leave, a man with nothing but a borrowed shirt on his back and a name that was now worthless. As he reached the door, he turned back. "The foundation," he said, his voice rough. "It's a good thing, Amara, a really good thing." It was a small, inadequate sentence for the enormity of his failure, but it was the first honest thing he had said all day. The first thing that wasn't a strategy or a plea. It was just a simple, painful acknowledgement of her goodness and his own profound lack of it. Amara and David watched him go. When the door closed, Amara let out a long, slow breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The legal battle was over, but the emotional war inside her was far from finished. David reached over and gently placed his hand over hers on the table. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a simple, grounding act of solidarity, of human connection. "You were incredible," he said softly. "You did the right thing, and the hard thing." Amara looked at their hands, then up at his face. His eyes held no judgment, only a quiet, steady strength. In the cold, sterile aftermath of her old life, a new, fragile bond was forming. It wasn't love, not yet. It was a glimmer of something far more precious, the possibility of being seen, of being respected, of being safe. A glimmer of humanity in the ruins. This act marks a significant emotional shift, introducing a new dynamic with David and a moment of remorse from Jide. It explores the idea that true strength isn't about power over others, but about integrity and purpose. Do you believe a person can truly change after causing so much harm? Or is Jide's remorse just a temporary reaction to his loss? Let us know your thoughts. In the weeks that followed the signing, Amara's world began to settle into a new, unfamiliar rhythm. The chaos of the takeover subsided, replaced by the quiet, demanding work of restructuring the company she now fully owned. She renamed it Nexus Innovations, a name that spoke of connection and progress, severing the final tie to Jide's ego. The atmosphere in the office transformed. Fear was replaced by a collaborative energy. Amara, no longer a ghost in the machine, was a visible, accessible leader. She held town halls, listened to her employees, and promoted talented people who had been overlooked in Jide's reign of charisma. She was, in every sense, rebuilding her own house. Her relationship with David deepened, evolving from a professional alliance into a quiet, steady friendship. He was her sounding board, her confidant. They had long dinners where they talked not about contracts and clauses, but about books, music, and their dreams for the future. With David, Amara felt herself unfurling, rediscovering parts of her personality she had kept locked away for years. Her dry wit, her passion for old jazz, her fierce optimism. He laughed at her jokes. He listened, truly listened when she spoke. He looked at her not as an asset or an accessory, but as an equal. It was a slow, gentle healing, a balm on the raw wound of her past. One evening, they were walking along the Lekki Ikoyi link bridge, the city lights glittering on the water below. It was a rare moment of peace, the air warm and breezy.
"You know," David said, his hands in his pockets as they strolled, "for a genius who can build a digital empire and dismantle it in a single night, you're surprisingly bad at choosing movie night films." Amara laughed, a real, unburdened sound that still felt new to her. "Excuse me, the French Existentialist Film Festival was a cultural experience." "It was a cultural experience in how to fall asleep sitting up," he teased. "Next time I'm picking, and it will have car chases, and possibly a Hemsworth." The easy banter, the shared laughter, it was everything she had craved for years. He stopped walking and turned to her, his expression growing serious. "Amara," he said softly, "I'm so incredibly proud of what you're doing. The foundation, the company, you're building something that matters." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "And I care about you a great deal." Her heart stuttered. It was a simple, honest declaration, devoid of the possessive, demanding language she associated with love. It was an offering, not a claim. And in that moment, she realized she felt the same.
The contrast was staggering. He had spent his life building an empire to serve his own ego, and her first act, upon seizing control of that empire, was to give a piece of it away, to build something for others. He thought of her mother's words. "My daughter, she laid every brick. She was a builder. It was her nature. And he had tried to make her a decoration." With a final shuddering breath, Jeed signed the document. He pushed it back across the table. It was done. He stood up to leave, a man with nothing but a borrowed shirt on his back and a name that was now worthless. As he reached the door, he turned back. "The foundation," he said, his voice rough. "It's a good thing, Amara, a really good thing." It was a small, inadequate sentence for the enormity of his failure, but it was the first honest thing he had said all day, the first thing that wasn't a strategy or a plea. It was just a simple, painful acknowledgement of her goodness and his own profound lack of it. Amara and David watched him go. When the door closed, Amara let out a long, slow breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The legal battle was over, but the emotional war inside her was far from finished. David reached over and gently placed his hand over hers on the table. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a simple, grounding act of solidarity, of human connection. "You were incredible," he said softly. "You did the right thing. And the hard thing." Amara looked at their hands, then up at his face. His eyes held no judgment, only a quiet, steady strength. In the cold, sterile aftermath of her old life, a new, fragile bond was forming. It wasn't love, not yet. It was a glimmer of something far more precious, the possibility of being seen, of being respected, of being safe. A glimmer of humanity in the ruins. This act marks a significant emotional shift, introducing a new dynamic with David and a moment of remorse from Jeed. It explores the idea that true strength isn't about power over others, but about integrity and purpose. Do you believe a person can truly change after causing so much harm? Or is Jeed's remorse just a temporary reaction to his loss? Let us know your thoughts. In the weeks that followed the signing, Amara's world began to settle into a new, unfamiliar rhythm. The chaos of the takeover subsided, replaced by the quiet, demanding work of restructuring the company she now fully owned. She renamed it Nexus Innovations, a name that spoke of connection and progress, severing the final tie to Jeed's ego. The atmosphere in the office transformed. Fear was replaced by a collaborative energy. Amara, no longer a ghost in the machine, was a visible, accessible leader. She held town halls, listened to her employees, and promoted talented people who had been overlooked in Jeed's reign of charisma. She was, in every sense, rebuilding her own house. Her relationship with David deepened, evolving from a professional alliance into a quiet, steady friendship. He was her sounding board, her confidant. They had long dinners where they talked not about contracts and clauses, but about books, music, and their dreams for the future.
With David, Amara felt herself unfurling, rediscovering parts of her personality she had kept locked away for years. Her dry wit, her passion for old jazz, her fierce optimism. He laughed at her jokes. He listened, truly listened when she spoke. He looked at her not as an asset or an accessory, but as an equal. It was a slow, gentle healing, a balm on the raw wound of her past. One evening they were walking along the Lekki-Ikoyi link bridge, the city lights glittering on the water below. It was a rare moment of peace, the air warm and breezy. "You know," David said, his hands in his pockets as they strolled, "for a genius who can build a digital empire and dismantle it in a single night, you're surprisingly bad at choosing movie night films." Amara laughed, a real, unburdened sound that still felt new to her. "Excuse me, the French Existentialist Film Festival was a cultural experience." "It was a cultural experience in how to fall asleep sitting up," he teased. "Next time, I'm picking, and it will have car chases, and possibly a Hemsworth." The easy banter, the shared laughter, it was everything she had craved for years. He stopped walking and turned to her, his expression growing serious. "Amara," he said softly, "I'm so incredibly proud of what you're doing. The foundation, the company, you're building something that matters." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "And I care about you, a great deal." Her heart stuttered. It was a simple, honest declaration, devoid of the possessive, demanding language she associated with love. It was an offering, not a claim. And in that moment, she realized she felt the same.
The respect had blossomed into affection, the affection into something deeper, something hopeful. She was ready to step out of the shadow of her past and into the light of a possible future. "I care about you too, David," she whispered. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up his entire face. He didn't kiss her. He simply reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The gesture was a promise. It felt like coming home. Meanwhile, Jide was living in a hell of his own making. He had moved into a small, grimy one-room apartment that his mother had paid the deposit for. The nothing Amara had left him with was now his stark reality. The silence was the worst part. The silence where there used to be ringing phones, fawning assistants, and the constant hum of a life in motion. Now there was only the drip of a leaky faucet and the roar of the generator from the building next door. His remorse, which had felt so sharp and real in that conference room, began to curdle. Loneliness and failure were bitter pills to swallow, and his ego, though battered, was not dead. It began to whisper poison in his ear. "She did this to you. She stole your life. Look at you. You were a king. And that lawyer, that quiet, smug lawyer, he has your life now. He has her." The thought of Amara with David became an obsession. He imagined them in his penthouse, drinking his wine, laughing at his expense. The image of David's hand covering hers on the conference table replayed in his mind, no longer a gesture of support, but a brazen act of theft. His fledgling remorse was consumed by a tidal wave of bitter, corrosive jealousy. He started watching. He couldn't help himself. He used the last of his borrowed money to buy cheap data for his phone, and he scrolled through social media like a ghost haunting a feast. He saw the news articles about Nexus Innovations. He saw a picture from a charity event, Amara on a stage, looking radiant and confident. And, standing just behind her, looking at her with undisguised admiration, was David. That was the picture that broke him. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the company. It was about her. She was supposed to be broken without him. She was supposed to be the one who was lost, grieving the life he had given her. But she wasn't. She was thriving. She was happy. Her happiness was his damnation. If he couldn't have his old life back, then he would make damn sure she couldn't enjoy her new one. He couldn't destroy her financially. She was too well protected for that. But he could destroy her peace. He could destroy her new relationship. He could remind her of the pain, the humiliation, the man she should be afraid of. He knew her weakness, or what he perceived as her weakness, her mother.
His plan was simple, cruel, and pathetic. He went to a local market and bought a cheap, untraceable burner phone. Then he began to wait, watching the house again, learning the rhythms of Grace's life. One afternoon, he saw Grace leave for her weekly church group meeting. He knew she would be gone for at least 2 hours. This was his chance. He couldn't get past the security Amara had in place, but he didn't need to. He just needed to create the illusion of a threat. He took a small can of red paint. He walked to the side of the house, out of the direct line of sight of the security cameras he had spotted. On the clean white wall of her home, he scrawled a single, ugly word in dripping red letters: whore. It was vile. It was childish. It was meant to wound, to contaminate her sanctuary with a word that had been used against women for centuries. But he wasn't done. He took the burner phone and sent a text to a number he still knew by heart, Amara's personal number. The text was simple: I can still get to you. I can get to anyone you love. Look what I did to Mummy's house. You'll never be safe from me. He sent the message and then snapped the phone in half, tossing the pieces into a nearby gutter. His heart was pounding with a sick, thrilling power. He had punched back. He had made her feel something other than happiness. He had made her feel fear. Amara was in a board meeting presenting her quarterly projections when her phone buzzed with the text. She glanced at it, her professional smile faltering for a split second. The anonymous number. The ugly, possessive words. Mummy's house. Ice flooded her veins. She excused herself from the meeting, her face a pale, calm mask that betrayed none of the screaming terror inside her. She called David first. He's threatening my mother, she said, her voice tight with panic. I'm on my way, David said instantly. Call your security team. Tell them to lock down the street. I'll meet you there.
The drive to her mother's house was the longest of her life. Every worst-case scenario played out in her mind. When she arrived, the street was already cordoned off. David was there, his car parked haphazardly. He ran to her as she got out, his face grim. "She's fine," he said immediately, grabbing her arms to steady her. "Your mother is safe." The team got her from the church and took her to a secure location. She never even saw it. "Saw what?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. David hesitated, then led her around the side of the house. And she saw it. The hideous red word dripping down the wall of the home she had bought with her first real success. The home that was supposed to be a symbol of safety and love. It felt like a physical violation, a desecration, a wound carved into the very heart of her family. In that moment, any lingering pity she had for Jeed, any fragile hope that he might have been capable of change, of redemption, completely and utterly evaporated. It was incinerated by the heat of her renewed rage. The kick in the ballroom had been an act of public dominance. This was an act of intimate terror. It was a calculated, malicious strike at the one thing she held most sacred. She looked at the ugly red word and then at David's horrified, protective face. Jeed hadn't just tried to hurt her. He had tried to poison this new, fragile happiness. He had tried to pull her back into the darkness with him. "He didn't just want the money," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "He wants to destroy me. He wants me to be as miserable and alone as he is." "We'll handle it, Amara," David said, his voice firm. "We'll file a police report. We'll get a restraining order. We will use the full force of the law." Amara shook her head, a cold, hard clarity settling over her. No. She turned to face him, and the look in her eyes was one he had never seen before. It was the look of a queen who had just had her last illusion shattered. It was the look of a builder who had decided it was time to tear one final thing down. "The law is too slow," she said, her voice like ice. "And a restraining order is a piece of paper. He just proved that. He thinks he can still hurt me. He thinks he's found a weakness." She took a deep, steadying breath. "He's wrong. He didn't find my weakness. He just showed me his." This was the shatter point. The moment the battle for her future became a war.
Jeed, in his pathetic, desperate act of malice, hadn't broken her. He had focused her. He had just handed her the one thing she needed to end this, once and for all: the justification. The air in David's office the next morning was thick with tension. The desecration of her mother's home had changed the calculus of the entire situation. The game was no longer about assets and agreements. It was about safety and finality. On the polished table between them lay a single, dark gray flash drive. It was small, innocuous, but Amara knew it held the power of a tactical nuke. "Are you sure about this, Amara?" David asked, his voice low and serious. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Once we give this to the authorities, there's no coming back. This isn't about financial ruin. This is about prison. A long time." Amara stared at the flash drive. It contained the complete, unredacted file she had kept for years, her secret ledger. It wasn't just the evidence of the tax schemes and inflated expenses they had used as leverage in the severance agreement. This was everything else. The back-channel deals he'd made and hidden from her. The clear evidence of bribery for a major government contract. The detailed logs of him using the company's servers to run a high-stakes, illegal online gambling ring for his wealthy friends. It was a complete and total portrait of a man who believed rules were for other people. She had held this back. In their initial confrontation, she had used just enough to get him to sign his life away. But she had kept the truly damning evidence in reserve. A part of her, the part that still remembered the boy in the leaky office, had wanted to leave him a sliver of a future, however bleak. She wanted to win, not annihilate. Jeed's desperate, cruel act had changed that. He had declared that as long as he was free, she would never be. He had made the choice for her. Annihilation was now the only path to peace. "He crossed a line, David," she said, her voice hard. "He came after my family. He tried to use the person I love most in the world to terrorize me. There are no more half measures. I want him gone. I want him in a place where he can't hurt anyone ever again." David nodded slowly, his expression grim. He understood. He had seen the terror in her eyes the day before, and the cold fury that had replaced it. "Okay," he said. "I'll prepare a brief and we'll meet with my contacts at the EFCC."
He reached for the flash drive, but Amara placed her hand on it first. She hesitated. The finality of it was suffocating. This was the point of no return. Was this who she wanted to be? A woman who sent the father of her past life to prison? "Just give me an hour," she said, her voice softer now. I need a minute to think, alone." David saw the conflict in her eyes, the war between her righteous anger and her innate decency. He gave her a look of profound understanding. "Of course. Take all the time you need. My office is yours." He stood up and walked out, closing the door softly behind him, leaving her alone with her choice. Amara sat in the silent, sunlit room, the flash drive feeling as heavy as a gravestone in her hand. She thought about Jeed's face, twisted with disgust as he kicked her. She thought of the ugly red words scarring her mother's home. The anger was still there, hot and sharp. Vengeance felt like justice. It felt clean. It felt necessary. But then another image surfaced. Jeed, in that conference room, his shoulders slumped in defeat, saying, "The foundation, it's a good thing, Amara." A flicker of the man he might have been, a ghost of a conscience. She closed her eyes. What would sending him to prison truly accomplish? It would keep her safe, yes, but it would also tether her to him forever, a silent partner in his misery. Her victory would be defined by his destruction. Her peace would be built on the foundations of his cage. Was that freedom? Or was it just a different kind of prison? She pulled out her phone and looked at the picture that had sent Jeed over the edge, her and David at the charity gala. She looked happy, confident, and free. She had already won. She had taken back her life, her work, her name. She had built something new and beautiful from the ashes of what he had burned down. Jeed's pathetic act of vandalism wasn't a sign of his power, it was a sign of his utter powerlessness. He was a ghost, raging at a world that had already moved on without him. Her decision, when it came, was not a lightning strike of clarity, but a slow, quiet dawn. True victory wasn't about punishing him more. It was about choosing her own peace, completely and utterly on her own terms. She stood up and walked to the office door, the flash drive still in her hand. She found David in the small kitchenette, staring out the window, nursing a cup of coffee. "I've made a decision," she said. He turned, his eyes questioning. She held up the flash drive. "I want you to destroy this." David stared at her, then at the drive, his brow furrowed in confusion. Amara, after what he did. "What he did was the desperate act of a broken man," she said, her voice steady and clear. "He has no power over me anymore, David, not unless I give it to him. Pushing this button, it keeps me in his story. It makes the final chapter of my life about his punishment. I don't want that." She stepped closer to him. "I want the final chapter of my life to be about my happiness, about my work, about my mother's safety, about us." She took a deep breath. "I don't want to be the woman who destroyed Jeed Okoro. I want to be the woman who built Nexus Innovations. I want to be the woman who created a foundation to help others. That's my story. He is nothing more than a footnote." A slow smile spread across David's face, one filled with relief, admiration, and love. "You," he said, shaking his head in wonder, "are the strongest person I have ever met." He took the flash drive from her. He didn't say another word. He simply walked to his desk, took out a heavy-duty office shredder designed for destroying hard drives, and dropped it in. The sound of the plastic and metal grinding into unrecognizable dust was the sound of the final chain breaking. It was the sound of true freedom. In his grimy one-room apartment, Jeed was a wreck. He hadn't slept. He was waiting for the inevitable, the police banging on his door, the public disgrace, the end. He had played his last desperate card, and he knew it was only a matter of time before Amara retaliated with overwhelming force. The fear was a living thing inside him, clawing at his insides. But as the day wore on, nothing happened. No police, no angry calls, only silence. The silence was more terrifying than the arrest would have been. What was she planning? What new, unimagined torment was she devising for him? By evening, his fear had curdled into something else, a profound, soul-crushing emptiness. He had done the most hateful thing he could imagine, and the response was nothing. It was the ultimate dismissal. He wasn't even worth her anger anymore. He wasn't a villain to be vanquished. He was just irrelevant. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had spent his life trying to be seen, to be important, to be the king.
And he had ended up as a ghost, haunting a life that no longer had a place for him. He looked around his squalid room, the peeling paint, the single mattress on the floor, the pathetic remnants of his former glory. This was the kingdom he had built for himself. He finally, truly saw himself. Not the mogul, not the victim, but the architect of his own desolation. The remorse he had felt in the conference room returned, but this time it wasn't a flicker, it was a flood, a devastating, cleansing wave of shame for the man he had become and the good woman he had brutalized. He found a pen and a crumpled piece of paper. He began to write. He didn't write a defense or an excuse. He didn't ask for forgiveness or for a second chance. He wrote a confession. He detailed every lie, every betrayal, every moment he had belittled her and taken credit for her genius. He wrote about the kick, describing not just the action, but the ugly, rotten pride he had felt in that moment. He wrote about the paint on her mother's wall, calling it the cowardly act of a pathetic monster. He wrote for hours, the words pouring out of him in a torrent of long overdue truth. When he was done, he had a multi-page letter that was a testament to his own failure. He didn't know if she would ever see it. He didn't know how to get it to her, but he knew he had to write it. It was the only decent thing he had left to do. It was his own choice, in his own lonely reckoning, not to fight, not to hide, but to finally, unequivocally tell the truth. 6 months passed. The silence that Jide had once feared became his new reality. He found a menial, cash-in-hand job at a construction site, the grueling physical labor a welcome punishment. The sun beat down on his back, his hands grew calloused, and for the first time in his adult life, he was truly invisible. No one knew his name, no one knew who he used to be. The fall from grace had been absolute, but in the dust and sweat of his new life, a strange thing happened. The weight of his own ego began to lift. Stripped of everything he had used to define himself, the money, the fame, the power, he was forced to build a new identity from the rubble. He was no longer Jide Okoro, the mogul. He was just Jide, a man trying to survive the day. He kept the letter he had written. It was folded and worn, tucked into the pocket of his work trousers. It was his penance, a constant reminder of the truth. He never tried to send it. It wasn't for her, he realized. It was for him. A testament to the man he was determined not to be anymore. One day, his site foreman, a grizzled old man named Ade, saw him giving half of his meager lunch to a stray dog. Ade had been hard on him, but he'd also been fair. He clapped a heavy hand on Jide's shoulder. "You're a good worker, Jide," he said, his voice gruff. "Quiet. But you do the work. You've got a good heart in there somewhere." The simple, unadorned praise, coming from a man who demanded respect through action, not reputation, struck Jide with more force than any business award ever had. A good heart. He hadn't thought he had one left. He simply nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. It was a single brick, but it was a start, a foundation for a new man. Meanwhile, Amara's life was in full bloom. Nexus Innovations was more successful than ever, known not just for its cutting-edge technology, but for its ethical, employee-first culture. The foundation she had started was her true passion. It had already sponsored its first cohort of brilliant young women, providing them with the resources and mentorship to launch their own tech startups. Amara saw her younger self in their bright, ambitious faces and felt a sense of purpose that dwarfed any satisfaction she had ever gotten from a stock ticker. Her relationship with David was a source of quiet, constant joy. It was a partnership built on a foundation of respect, trust, and shared laughter. They had moved out of the penthouse, with its ghosts and its opulence, and into a beautiful but more modest house with a garden, where David was attempting, with disastrous results, to grow his own tomatoes. Their love wasn't a whirlwind of drama and passion. It was a deep, steady river, calm on the surface, but with a powerful, unshakable current beneath. One evening, Amara was at her mother's house for their weekly dinner. The ugly red paint on the wall had long been painted over, but the memory had left a scar. To counter it, Amara had commissioned a local artist to paint a beautiful mural of vibrant hibiscus flowers over the spot, a symbol of reclamation, of turning a wound into a work of art. Grace was beaming, bustling around her kitchen. "The foundation got another big write-up in The Guardian," she said, her voice swelling with pride. "They called you one of the most important philanthropists in Nigeria." Amara smiled. "I have a good team, Mama." "And a good man," Grace added, giving her a knowing look. "David is a good man, Amara. He looks at you like you hung the moon." "He does," Amara agreed, her heart full. "He really does."
Later, as they were clearing the table, Grace handed her a thick, worn envelope. "This came for you last week. It was just left on the doorstep. No stamp. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you." Amara's blood ran cold for a second. The envelope had her name on it, written in a familiar, bold script. Jade's handwriting. She hesitated, a phantom echo of the old fear rising in her. "It's okay, Mama," she said, forcing a calm she didn't feel. She took the envelope out to the garden, to the bench beside the hibiscus mural. With trembling fingers, she opened it. It was his letter. She read it as the sun set, the pages filled with his cramped, desperate scrawl. She read his confession, his unvarnished, brutal self-assessment. He spared himself no mercy, painting a portrait of his own monstrous ego, his cruelty, his cowardice. There were no requests, no apologies aimed at winning her back. It was simply the truth laid bare. She read about the kick, and for the first time, she saw it from the inside of his mind. An act not of strength, but of profound, pathetic weakness. As she read, something shifted within her. The last hardened kernel of anger she held against him didn't melt away in forgiveness. It simply dissolved. It became irrelevant. The letter wasn't about her anymore. It was about his own tortured soul beginning the long, painful process of healing itself. He was finally taking responsibility, not because he was forced to, but because he had chosen to. She folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She wouldn't keep it. She wouldn't destroy it. It was part of a story that was already over. She left it on the bench, a final offering to the ghosts of the past, and went back inside to the warmth and light of her family. A month later, on a bright Tuesday morning, Amara was in her office, on a video call with the director of her mother's favorite local charity, a small but vital organization that provided food and shelter for displaced families. "I don't understand," Amara said, looking at the financial report on her screen. "Our foundation's quarterly donation was sent last week, but this report shows a second, anonymous donation, a very large one. It's almost as much as ours. It says here it was made in cash, deposited across several different banks." The director, a kindly older woman, beamed. "Yes, it was a miracle, Miss Nwabueze. A young man came to our main office, dressed like a laborer, very rough-looking. He just handed over a duffel bag full of cash. He wouldn't give his name. He just said it was a debt being paid. And he left a small note to be given to our patron, your mother." Amara's heart stopped. A note? What did it say? "Just a moment," the director said, shuffling some papers. "Ah, here it is. Very strange. It just has one initial on it." She held the note up to the camera. On the small, simple piece of paper was a single, elegantly drawn letter. J. Amara stared at the initial, her mind reeling. The duffel bag, the cash. It was his severance, the money he had managed to hide away, the nest egg he was supposed to use to start over. He had given it all away. Not to her, not to get back in her good graces, but to a charity her mother loved, an anonymous act of restitution, an echo of the way she had silently managed their finances, but repurposed for pure, unadulterated good. He hadn't just paid a debt to society, he had paid a debt to the spirit of her family, to the values he had once trampled on. Her revenge was never his destruction. It was her own magnificent, joyful, and peaceful life. But in an act of grace she never could have predicted, her survival had sparked his redemption. The man she had to leave behind had, in his own broken way, found a path forward. Later that evening, David found her in their garden, looking up at the moon. He came and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. She leaned back against his solid, comforting frame. She thought about the kick on the cold marble floor. It felt like a scene from someone else's life, a black-and-white film she had watched long ago. The pain was gone. The humiliation was gone. All that was left was a story of a woman who had fallen and a woman who had learned to fly. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice full of a quiet, profound peace, "that a person can build a beautiful house, even if the ground it's on was once a battlefield." He kissed the top of her head. "Yes," he said, "and you, my love, have built a palace."
She turned in his arms and smiled, a true, brilliant smile that reached her eyes and lit up the darkness. She had found her victory, her reunion with herself, and in the most unexpected of ways, a form of redemption for the man she once loved. She had found her peace, and with David she had, at long last, found her love. The story concludes with acts of quiet redemption and unexpected grace, emphasizing that the greatest victory lies not in vengeance, but in building a life of peace and purpose. What does an act of true redemption look like to you? Is it public apology or private restitution? Let us know in the comments what you think about Jaid's final choice and Amara's ultimate triumph. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.